very much related to simplifying a fraction. And the only time you have to simplify a radical, or a square root anyway, I shouldn't say radicals because there's lots of roots where you need to do this, but the only time you need to simplify a square root is in a case like this. There isn't a number times itself that will give you 50. So 50 is not a perfect square. So unfortunately, you can't just say, oh, I know what that is, and move on, which is why you have to simplify. So there are actually two strategies. I gave you both of them in your notebook page, but you're gonna notice right here, the one that I'm gonna go over is the one that, and this is, this is an Algebra 1 concept, so I've taught this tons of times between high school and when I taught advanced kids in Oldham County too. So out of these two strategies, the one that I definitely think is the easiest to understand is method number 1, but I know not everybody learns the same, which is why I put method number 2 in there. If you look over there, it's just like a lot more steps, in my opinion. The problem with method number 1 is that you have to know your perfect squares, because what you do is you look at 50 and you say, well, 50 is not a perfect square, excuse me. But what is a perfect square that is a factor of 50? 25. So this is why some people don't like this one, because you got to know your perfect squares, but you really got to know your perfect squares anyway. And again, you've got that page of your notebook where those are all listed out for you. So what you do is you break up the square root of 50, in this case, into 25, because 25 is a perfect square. And it's square root of 25 times the square root of 2. And then what's the square root of 25? Well, that's just going to be 5. And then you can't take the square root of 2 without it turning into one of those crazy decimals. So that is what we call as simplified as it could get. So you literally just think, well, what is a perfect square that will go into that number? In this case, it's 25, and I call it like jailbreaking it. It's kind of like that 25 is like peace out, gets out from underneath the radical, and it ends up on the outside. This is a box that's around the answer. I hope that doesn't look confusing, like some kind of special notation or something. But the 5 comes out from under the radical, and then you just leave the 2, okay? There is something that you kind of need to know, that technically it's a positive 5 radical 2 and a negative, because you know how every square root has a positive and a negative version, but we're just going to focus on the positive version for now. I'll tell you when we got to start really focusing on for simplifying, typically they just want you to focus on the positive version. So example number 2, same idea. Square radical 72, there is no perfect, that is not a perfect square. So you're going to have to factor it. Factoring means pull it apart into its factors. 36 is a factor. So you'll take the square root of 36. That will come out from under the radical. And again, 2 stays underneath the radical. Now, technically, and I added this to your notebook, technically, you don't have to take the biggest perfect square. So everybody look up here for a second. I want everybody, even if you think you know what you're doing, okay, you know how you can like simplify a fraction, by dividing it by a number more than a couple of times? You can do the same thing when simplifying a radical. Like all is not lost. If you are like, crap, I don't know what the biggest factor is that goes into 180. If you don't know that it's 36, but you at least know that like 4 goes into it, you can break it apart into chunks and do it that way. It's just obviously going to take longer, right? Because this way, it was just two short steps, right? Square root of 36 is 6, and then the 5 can't be simplified. But this side, though, like what this student did, is they're like, well, I know 4 goes into it, so I'm going to take the square root of 4 and get 2. Now I know that 45 can be broken up into 9 and 5. Well, what's the square root of 9? Well, that becomes 3. So if you decide to do it this way, guys, if you have multiple square roots that you break apart, what does it look like you need to do? So you took the 2 out and you took the 3 out. What do you need to do with those? Add them, subtract the 2 and the 3, multiply them, divide them. What do you do with the 2 and the 3 once you get them both out? You multiply them, exactly. So you can do it, and you can see you still end up with the same answer. You still end up with 6 radical 5. It just depends on whether or not you want to invest, whether or not you do more steps in order to get there, if that makes sense. So I am going to shut up.